The sun was casting its final rays over the rolling hills of Piedmont in northern Italy. It was the spring of 1383, and the forests of Quarona filled the air with wild fragrances of cypress and olive trees. The stones along the paths still held the warmth of the day, as a group of peasants in solemn procession carried the small body of a young girl. Her face, though marked by suffering, radiated a serenity that seemed not to belong to this world. Her name was Panacea. She was only 15, and yet her name was already whispered with reverence among the inhabitants of those shaded valleys. Not because she was of noble birth or possessed earthly riches. No, the young girl was merely the daughter of a humble shepherd named Lorenzo de Muzzy. What set her apart was something the physical eyes could not see, but that everyone around her could feel. An inner light that overflowed in every gesture, in every word. The sky that evening was tinged with purples and golds, colors that seemed to clash with the sorrow that hung in the air. Women wept quietly, men walked with bowed heads, and even the children, usually restless, advanced in respectful silence. Yet, beyond the grief, there was something more in the atmosphere, a scent that couldn't be described, a sense that this death was not an end, but a beginning. News spread quickly through the valleys and mountains. The holy girl was murdered by her own stepmother. The details of the crime, though whispered in horror, were always followed by something even more astonishing. Her final words were words of forgiveness. How could anyone in their last breath forgive the one who took their life so cruelly? To understand this mystery, we must go back in time, to the birth of the one who would become known as the Blessed of Quarona. The winter of 1368 was particularly harsh in the Italian Alps. Snow fell heavily, sealing off roads and isolating the small mountain communities. It was during one of these white storms that a baby girl was born into a family of shepherds, a child with eyes as clear as the summer sky. Lorenzo de Muzzy and his wife Maria received the girl as a divine gift, a ray of sunshine in the darkness of winter. Panacea, Maria whispered as she held her daughter for the first time. The name was uncommon, but to her it felt perfect. In Greek it meant remedy for all ills, and there was something in that tiny being that brought comfort and peace. Maria was a woman of unshakable faith. Even in an age when the church often felt distant from the poor, she held a simple, authentic devotion in her heart. It was she who first taught Panacea to pray, not through memorized formulas, but by showing her how to find God in the simplest details of nature. Do you see how the sun rises every morning, my daughter? That's God promising us that after every night a new day will always come. Little Panacea absorbed these lessons with a receptiveness that surprised everyone. She still couldn't speak clearly, yet already clasped her little hands in prayer whenever she saw her mother doing the same. Her eyes, a translucent blue, seemed to see beyond what was visible. Panacea's childhood was marked by simplicity and intimate contact with nature. While other children were afraid to enter the denser forests, she seemed to find a sanctuary within them. Lorenzo often found her sitting beneath an ancient olive tree, talking to birds and small animals that, surprisingly, never fled from her presence. "Who are you talking to, daughter?" her father would ask, curious and a little concerned. "To St. Francis' friends, Papa," she would reply naturally, referring to the saint of Assisi who, according to her mother's stories, preached to birds and called all animals his brothers. At 5 years old, Panacea already displayed a connection with nature that many believed to be supernatural. Her father's sheep seemed to recognize her and followed her gently. Sparrows landed on her shoulders without fear. And more impressively, the medicinal herbs she picked seemed to have stronger effects when applied by her small hands. The happiness of those early years, however, would be cut short. When Panacea was 7 winters old, her mother was struck by a violent fever. For 3 days and 3 nights, the little girl never left her side, applying herbal compresses and whispering prayers that sprang spontaneously from her childlike heart. "Don't be afraid, Mama," the girl said, with a serenity far beyond her years. "I see a very beautiful lady beside you. She is smiling at you." On the morning of the 4th day, Maria de Muzzy departed this world with a smile on her lips. The entire village mourned the loss. Maria was known for her kindness and for never refusing help to anyone in need. But no one suffered more than little Panacea, who nonetheless amazed everyone with her peaceful acceptance. "Mommy is now with the lady in blue," she would explain to the other children, with a certainty that unsettled even the elders. "She asked me to take care of Daddy," and so she did. At just 7 years old, Panacea took on many household tasks. Her little hands learned to knead bread, milk the goats, and weave wool, but most importantly, she became Lorenzo's comfort, as he saw in his daughter a reflection of the wife he had lost. For 2 years, father and daughter lived in touching harmony. Lorenzo, still young and considered a good match among the widows of the region, refused any talk of remarriage. "I have my daughter and the memories of Maria. I don't need anything else," he would reply with a melancholic smile. Time, however, has its own plans, and so it was that during a fair in the nearby city of Novara, Lorenzo met Ottavia, a woman of striking beauty and seductive words. Unlike the simple peasant women of Quarona, Ottavia had lived in the city and carried a sophistication that captivated the lonely widower. The marriage happened quickly, to the surprise of the neighbors. Panacea, then 9 years old, received the news with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "Maybe it will be good to have a mother again," she confessed to her friend, an elderly woman known as Nonna Lucia, the local midwife and healer. "Remember, little one," warned the old lady, "not everything that glitters is gold. Guard your heart carefully." Lorenzo's return with his new wife marked the beginning of a difficult chapter in Panacea's life. At first glance, Ottavia seemed charmed by the girl. She praised her golden hair, admired her skill in housework, and even brought her a gift from the city, a small rosary of colorful beads. But as the days passed, the mask began to slip. The new stepmother could not understand or refused to accept Panacea's contemplative nature. She grew irritated by the time Panacea spent in prayer or by her insistence on feeding the birds even before preparing the family's breakfast. "This girl lives with her head in the clouds," she complained to Lorenzo. "We need to teach her to be practical or she'll never find a good husband." Lorenzo, torn between love for his daughter and the desire to please his new wife, tried to mediate the conflicts. But his peaceful nature made him weak in the face of Ottavia's dominant personality. Gradually, he gave up ground, allowing his wife to take control of Panacea's upbringing. Thus began the most difficult years of the young saint's life. Panacea's 10th birthday was marked by a significant change in the family dynamic. Ottavia, now firmly established as lady of the house, began to reveal her true character more openly. What had once been mere biting remarks turned into harsh commands, and not infrequently physical punishments. The girl, who had always found joy in the simplest tasks, now found herself burdened with exhausting chores. Before dawn, she was awakened to fetch water from a distant well. Then she had to feed the animals, clean the stables, prepare breakfast, and still help in the fields. "This is how a hard-working woman is made," Ottavia would say, in response to concerned glances from the neighbors. "Life is not easy, and the sooner she learns that, the better." What hurt Panacea the most, however, was not the physical labor. It was being forbidden from going to the small chapel in the village. Her stepmother declared that Sundays should be dedicated to thoroughly cleaning the house and preparing meals for the week. "God doesn't need you kneeling for hours in church," she scoffed. "If you want to serve him, start by being useful to your family." Lorenzo, who had once shared moments of prayer with his daughter, now rarely intervened. The kind and steady man he had been seemed to have become a shadow in his own home, avoiding conflict and seeking refuge in long shepherding trips. It was during this period that Panacea developed the habit of turning every task into a form of prayer. As her hands worked, her heart soared. The water she carried from the well reminded her of baptism. The bread she kneaded evoked the Eucharist. The care she gave to sick animals was her way of imitating the Good Shepherd. "How can you smile while working like this?" a friend her age once asked, amazed by her serenity in the face of such hardships. "When I do everything with love, even the stones on the path feel light," Panacea replied, with a wisdom far beyond her years. That answer, when it reached Ottavia's ears, only deepened her irritation. There was something in her stepdaughter's serenity that deeply unsettled her, perhaps because it reflected an inner peace Ottavia herself did not know. As Panacea grew in age and grace, the contrast between her radiance and the shadows cast by Ottavia became more evident to everyone. By the age of 12, villagers were already seeking the young girl for spiritual comfort and advice, something that enraged her stepmother. "Who does she think she is? A saint. She can barely read and already wants to teach others," Ottavia grumbled to her husband. It was around this time that the young girl found an unexpected ally, Friar Tommaso, an elderly Franciscan who regularly visited remote villages to offer the sacraments. Recognizing an extraordinary soul in Panacea, the friar began bringing her prayer books and stories of the saints. These meetings had to be secret, usually taking place in the woods where Panacea would take the sheep to graze. There, under the shelter of ancient trees, she eagerly absorbed the old friar's teachings. "God has a special purpose for you, little one," Friar Tommaso told her. "Your trials are like fire purifying gold." Through these teachings, Panacea deepened her understanding of suffering. She learned to see her hardships not as punishment, but as opportunities for spiritual growth. And more importantly, she learned to forgive daily the one who caused her pain. "Do not pray against your stepmother," the friar advised. "Pray for her." And so she did. Every night, before falling asleep on her straw mattress, Panacea offered a special prayer for Ottavia. "Lord, give her the peace she lacks, and help me to love her as you love us." This period also marked the beginning of the first events later considered miraculous in the girl's life. One particularly harsh winter morning, when milk and bread had become scarce in the village, Ottavia sent Panacea to fetch supplies from a neighboring town, several hours' walk away. "And don't come back without everything on this list," her stepmother warned, fully aware that the amount of money she gave wouldn't even cover half of it. The young girl set out before dawn, trudging through snow that reached her knees. Along the way, she encountered an old beggar, shivering from the cold and hunger. Without hesitation, she shared the small piece of bread she had brought for herself. "God bless you, child," said the man. "May your baskets never be empty." When Panacea arrived at the market, she discovered that prices had soared even higher due to the winter scarcity. With the money she had, she managed to buy only a small piece of cheese and a bit of flour, far less than what Ottavia had demanded. Distraught, she began her journey home, praying intensely. That was when she noticed something strange. Her basket seemed to grow heavier with each step. When she looked inside, she was astonished to see that the cheese had doubled in size and the bag of flour was overflowing. When she returned home late at night and presented the supplies to her stepmother, Ottavia eyed her suspiciously. "Where did you get the money to buy all this? Did you steal along the way?" "No, ma'am," Panacea answered simply. "It was God's generosity." Far from calming Ottavia, this response only fueled her rage. To her, Any mention of miracles or divine intervention felt like a personal insult, as if her stepdaughter were implying a connection to God that she herself lacked. From that moment on, the persecution grew more intense. Ottavia began locking Panacea inside the house during village religious celebrations. She forbade her from giving food to the needy, as she had done before. And in a particularly cruel act, she burned the little prayer books Friar Tommaso had given her. "This is witchcraft disguised as holiness," she declared, as the pages turned to ash in the fire. "I will drive this nonsense out of your head, even if I have to do it by force." Panacea watched her treasures burn with silent tears, but without rebellion. That night, kneeling by the window of her room and gazing at the stars, she had an experience that would forever change her understanding of suffering. While deep in prayer, she felt a luminous presence beside her. It wasn't a visible vision, but rather an inner certainty, the same one she had felt by her mother's deathbed. A voice, not physical but clearly perceived in her heart, spoke gently. "Do not fear, little one. Your tears are precious, and not one falls in vain. What you lost on paper you have gained in your heart, where no fire can burn and no thief can steal." From that night on, something changed in Panacea for good. Sadness gave way to a quiet joy that puzzled everyone around her. The harsher the trials imposed by Ottavia, the more radiant the young girl seemed. It wasn't a forced or artificial happiness, but a deep peace that flowed from her certainty of being loved by God. At 13, a new element further complicated the family dynamic. Ottavia gave birth to a son, the fruit of her marriage to Lorenzo. The arrival of little Antonio should have been a reason for celebration, but for the stepmother, it was simply another opportunity to sideline Panacea. "Now I have my own son. This house finally has a true heir," she declared, making no attempt to hide her intent to diminish her stepdaughter's importance. Panacea, however, welcomed her half-brother with genuine love. She took every chance to care for the baby, singing him soft lullabies and telling him stories about angels and saints. Little Antonio, in turn, seemed to recognize something special in her. His cries would stop the moment she took him in her arms. This bond between the half-siblings was met with growing resentment from Ottavia. The stepmother couldn't bear to see how her own son responded with smiles to Panacea's affection. In her mind, tormented by jealousy, she began to imagine that her stepdaughter was using some kind of spell to steal Antonio's love. It was in this context of mounting tension that Panacea's final year on Earth began. The winter of 1382 arrived with unusual severity, even for the standards of the Piedmont Mountains. The snow fell incessantly, further isolating the small community of Quarona. Inside the de Muzzy household, the cold outside seemed mild compared to the emotional chill Ottavia directed toward her stepdaughter. Panacea was now 14, blossoming into a serene beauty that didn't go unnoticed. Her golden hair, her translucent blue eyes, and especially the expression of inner peace on her face drew admiring glances whenever she went to the market or the village fountain. This admiration from the community only deepened Ottavia's bitterness. The stepmother, who had always taken pride in her own appearance, now found herself overshadowed by a teenage girl who, ironically, made no effort to draw attention to herself. "Parading through the village to attract stares, aren't you? Do you think I don't see your intentions?" she would accuse after each of Panacea's outings. "No, ma'am. I'm only fulfilling my duties," the young girl would respond with downcast eyes. Lorenzo, increasingly absent, now spent long stretches in the mountains with his herds, leaving his wife as the sole authority in the household. When he returned, the weariness and emotional dependence he had developed toward Ottavia made him indifferent to his daughter's silent pleas. It was during this winter that stories about Panacea's holiness began to circulate more widely. People spoke of how she had healed a dying lamb with nothing but her prayers. How provisions never ran out in homes she visited, even in times of scarcity. How the sick felt relief simply by having her hold their hands. These stories, far from making her family proud, became a source of torment for Panacea. Octavia saw them as personal insults, evidence that her stepdaughter was conspiring to shame her in the eyes of the village. "Oh, so now you perform miracles, want people to think you live with a witch," she screamed after hearing yet another tale of an extraordinary deed attributed to the girl. The situation reached a boiling point in the spring of 1383. Little Antonio, now almost 2 years old, had developed a deep attachment to Panacea, bordering on adoration. He followed her everywhere, called out for her before even calling for his own mother, and only fell asleep peacefully when she was the one telling him bedtime stories. For Octavia, this was unbearable. The final straw came on a May afternoon, when returning from a visit to a nearby village, she found Antonio asleep in Panacea's arms. The young girl had also dozed off, and a look of profound peace lit up both their faces. Even more disturbing to the stepmother, she thought she saw a soft golden halo surrounding them. "Witch, you're enchanting my son!" she screamed, yanking the boy violently from his sister's arms. Antonio awoke frightened and began to cry uncontrollably, reaching his arms out to Panacea. That innocent gesture was the spark that ignited the powder keg that Octavia's heart had become. That night, while the young girl was engaged in her nightly prayers, the stepmother silently entered her room. In her hands, she held a rug-beating stick, heavy enough to cause serious harm. "You pray to steal my son and my husband, don't you?" Octavia hissed, her eyes bloodshot with hatred. Panacea looked up, surprised but not afraid. There was a depth in her gaze that transcended the moment, as if somehow she had long expected this final confrontation. "No, mother," she replied, using that form of address for the first time. "I pray for you, that you may find the peace you've been searching for." That response, far from calming Octavia, was like oil poured on the flames of her fury. With an animalistic cry, she raised the stick and struck the first blow. What followed was a fit of blind violence. Blow after blow, Octavia unleashed not only her hatred for Panacea, but all her life's frustrations, insecurities, and bitterness. The young girl did not scream, did not try to flee or defend herself. She received each strike with a supernatural dignity, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the window, as if gazing upon something or someone invisible to ordinary eyes. When the final blow fell and Panacea lay motionless on the packed earth floor, a ghostly silence fell over the room. Octavia, breathless, looked down at what she had done, flashes of realization flickering in her mind. It was then that something occurred, which later witnesses would consider Panacea's first posthumous miracle. The young girl, her body broken and bleeding, opened her eyes one last time. There was no accusation in her gaze, only infinite compassion. "I forgive you," she whispered, her lips already purple with the closeness of death. "And he does too." These were her final earthly words. With a soft sigh, Panacea de Muzzy left this world in 1383, having lived only 15 springs. The cry that followed did not come from the victim, but from the aggressor. Octavia, suddenly confronted with the magnitude of her crime and with the unexpected forgiveness, let out a wail that echoed through the sleeping village. A cry that, according to the oldest villagers, had never been heard in those valleys before and would never be forgotten. The news of Panacea's death spread quickly through Quarona and neighboring villages. Lorenzo, returning from a journey with his flocks, found his home turned into a scene of tragedy and the community in a state of shock. Octavia did not deny the crime. On the contrary, overwhelmed by devastating remorse, she confessed to anyone who would listen, detailing each blow with a morbid precision. Most striking of all was her insistence on repeating Panacea's final words, the forgiveness offered at the threshold of death. Medieval law was clear regarding the fate of confessed murderers, especially in cases of domestic killing or kinslaying. However, something extraordinary began to happen in the days following Panacea's death, something the people of the region interpreted as the first public sign of her sainthood. While the young girl's body was being prepared for burial, unexplained phenomena began to occur. The room where she died, once filled with the smell of blood, became infused with the scent of fresh roses, even though no flowers were nearby. Even more astonishing, the wounds on her body did not darken as normally happens after death. Instead, they remained rosy, as if life still lingered within her. The people of Quarona, moved by a mixture of devotion and curiosity, began visiting the de Muzzy home to pay their final respects. Among them was a desperate mother carrying her 3-year-old child who had been suffering from a persistent fever. For weeks, the little girl had burned with heat and weakened by the day, unresponsive to all conventional remedies. "Just let me touch her," the woman pleaded, kneeling beside Panacea's body. Everyone said she had the gift of healing in life, perhaps in death. No one dared to stop her. Gently, the mother laid the feverish child next to the young girl's body. What happened next was witnessed by all present. The sleeping child suddenly opened her eyes, the flush of fever disappeared from her cheeks, and she sat up, looking around with curious vitality. "The fever is gone," cried the mother, touching her daughter's forehead. "She's cool as morning dew." This was only the first of a series of extraordinary events that followed. A man, blind from birth, touched Panacea's rosary and cried out that he could see shadows and light for the first time. A woman with chronic leg wounds felt them close as she approached the body. News of these healings spread like wildfire, and soon pilgrims began arriving from increasingly distant villages. The local priest, initially skeptical, witnessed so many inexplicable events that he sent an urgent messenger to the Bishop of Novara. "Something extraordinary is happening in Quarona," he wrote. "I believe we are in the presence of a divine manifestation." Lorenzo, devastated by the loss of his daughter and the terrible revelation about his wife, found unexpected comfort in these signs. For him, every miracle attributed to Panacea was confirmation of what he had always felt. His daughter had been a special gift, a heavenly presence temporarily lent to the earth. As for Ottavia, her path took a surprising turn. While everyone expected her to be arrested and executed for her crime, something strange happened during the interrogation conducted by local authorities. The woman, who until then alternated between hysterical remorse and detailed confessions, suddenly fell silent. Her eyes, once clouded with hatred and later drowned in guilt, now showed an unexpected clarity. "She forgave me," Ottavia said, her voice calm. "And now I understand what that means. I don't deserve forgiveness, but she gave it anyway, just as Christ forgave from the cross." This parallel did not go unnoticed by the clergy present. The visible transformation in Ottavia, from a woman consumed by jealousy and hatred to someone who seemed to have found a deep understanding of mercy, was interpreted as yet another sign of Panacea's sanctity. Instead of the summary execution that would normally await a confessed murderer, Ottavia was sentenced to an extraordinary penance: to devote the rest of her life to caring for the sick and needy who now flocked to Quarona in search of the young martyr's intercession. Additionally, she was to participate annually in a penitential procession, retelling her crime and the forgiveness she had received. 7 days after her death, when Panacea's body should have already shown clear signs of decomposition, it remained intact. More than that, a growing fragrance of roses emanated from her body, and small droplets of a clear liquid, many compared it to perfumed oil, began to appear on her wounds. The Bishop of Novara, who had come to investigate the reports personally, was so moved that he ordered the construction of a small shrine to house the young girl's body. This child, he declared after witnessing several healings, was clearly chosen by God as an instrument of his mercy. The community mobilized fervently to build what would become the sanctuary of St. Panacea of Quarona. Men who could barely feed their families volunteered days of labor. Women donated family heirloom jewelry to purchase materials. Even children helped by collecting stones for the foundation. The sanctuary was built on the hillside where Panacea used to take the sheep to graze, a gentle slope overlooking the valley and the distant mountains. There, in a special reliquary, her body was placed, visible to pilgrims through a glass panel. In the years that followed, the fame of the little saint of Quarona spread throughout northern Italy. Her tomb became a pilgrimage site, especially for women who had suffered domestic violence, who saw in her an example of how love can transcend hatred, and for orphaned children who found in her a heavenly protector. As for Panacea's family, each followed their own path of redemption. Lorenzo devoted himself to his daughter's sanctuary, becoming its first caretaker. Little Antonio grew up hearing stories of the sister he had barely known, and eventually became a religious man, dedicated to charitable works. And Ottavia, perhaps the most transformed of them all, spent decades in active penance, eventually becoming known as the Woman of Forgiveness, someone who, through her own tragic example, taught the transformative power of mercy. In 1429, nearly 50 years after her death, Panacea de Muzzy was officially beatified by the Catholic Church. The canonization process, though initiated, was never completed due to political upheaval in the region in the centuries that followed. However, to the people of Piedmont, she has always been, and will always be, Saint Panacea. The girl who turned suffering into love and whose final act of forgiveness became a symbol of a grace that surpasses human understanding. Today, more than 6 centuries after Panacea's death, her little sanctuary still receives visitors. Not crowds like in the major pilgrimage centers, but a steady stream of people seeking something deeper than religious tourism. The young martyr's body, preserved in an extraordinary state for decades after her death, eventually gave in to the natural law of decomposition. However, her reliquary still holds some of her bones and the rosary she used in her secret prayers. On the walls of the sanctuary, ex-votos from all eras silently recount stories of graces received, small paintings depicting healings, photographs of children named in her honor, letters of gratitude written in many different languages. A visitor's book, replaced yearly due to the volume of messages, holds touching testimonies of inner transformation. I came with hatred in my heart toward the one who hurt me. I leave with the seed of forgiveness planted within me. As a doctor, I couldn't believe in miraculous healings. After my daughter's unexplained recovery, I come here every year, not to ask, but to give thanks. Saint of the impossible, teach me to forgive what feels unforgivable. The feast of Blessed Panacea is celebrated annually on May 5th, the date of her death. On this day, the mountains of Piedmont, already in full spring, bloom with wildflowers, many of which are gathered by local children to decorate the sanctuary. A solemn procession follows the path from the house where she lived, now also a small chapel, to the sanctuary on the hill. The most moving part of this celebration is the special participation of women and children who have suffered domestic violence. Dressed in white and carrying candles, they symbolize the transformation of suffering into light, the very miracle Panacea performed during her brief life on earth. In 2015, during his visit to Turin, Pope Francis made a special mention of the little saint of forgiveness, as he affectionately called Panacea. In a world torn apart by division and resentment, he said, we need examples like this young woman more than ever. She teaches us that forgiveness is not weakness, but the greatest transformative strength there is. Modern scholars of hagiography highlight a particularly relevant aspect of Panacea's story. She represents a form of accessible holiness, built not on grand deeds or positions of power, but on small daily acts of love and spiritual resilience amid adversity. What makes Panacea so powerful as a role model is precisely her apparent fragility, writes theologian Maria Bernardetti in her study Everyday Holiness. She didn't found religious orders, didn't write theological treatises, didn't convert nations. Her only miracle in life was to persist in love when everything invited her to hate. And that, paradoxically, is the hardest miracle of all. For the people of Corona and the surrounding regions, the story of their local saint is passed down from generation to generation like a precious treasure. In local schools, children learn about her not just as a religious figure, but as an example of resilience and dignity in the face of abuse. A lesson, sadly, still very much needed in our times. And so, the young shepherdess who transformed suffering into love continues her silent work in people's hearts. Her name, Panacea, remedy for all ills, has proven to be prophetic in ways her mother could never have imagined when she chose it. For if there is a universal remedy for the wounds of the human soul, perhaps it is this one that the young martyr offers us through her example. The understanding that forgiveness, even or especially when it seems impossible, has the power to free not only the one who is forgiven, but even more so the one who forgives. "I forgive you," she whispered with her last earthly breath. And in those 3 simple words, she offered the world an eternal lesson on the deepest nature of love. Prayer to Blessed Panacea. O Blessed Panacea of Muzzy, you who loved with purity and forgave with a wounded heart, intercede for us before God. Teach us to love in silence, to forgive even in the face of pain, and to trust in divine mercy even when everything seems dark. You who turned suffering into prayer and pain into light, visit today the homes marked by rejection, console the young who cry in secret, and inspire us to live with humility, faith, and peace. May your life teach us to see God, even in moments of anguish. Amen. My personal prayer. O Lord, our God, with grateful hearts, we lift our voices in thanksgiving for the gift of life and the privilege of carrying your love through the stories that inspire and transform us. We thank you, Father, for granting us the strength, wisdom, and courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has become a beacon of hope and light amid the adversities of the world. We recognize that every life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for each moment we are given to witness and spread your word. May every story told, every message of faith, and every divine teaching reach the hearts that thirst for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, the blessings that multiply, and the opportunity to contribute to the spread of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those seeking direction and comfort. May your grace continue to shine upon us, and may we be instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and gesture. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to take part in this sacred mission. Amen. With a serene heart and eyes lifted toward the heavens, the story of Blessed Panacea of Muzzy invites us to reflect on the power of forgiveness, not the kind that waits for recognition, but the kind born of true love. Even in pain, Panacea did not curse, did not rebel. She offered her suffering as prayer, and in that silent offering, her sainthood bloomed. Today, her life echoes like a gentle whisper in the hearts of the wounded, showing us that purity is not weakness and that forgiveness can be the most powerful weapon against evil. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now to the Sacred Stories channel. Share this video with someone who needs comfort and leave a like. It helps us keep spreading light through the lives of the saints. And tell me in the comments, do you know someone who, even while suffering, is still able to truly forgive? Now click on one of the videos above It was chosen especially for you.